I'm Bobby Lopez from Texas State University. Today we're going to talk about the Timpani Etude that I chose for the TMEA All-State Music. And this comes from the Vic Firth book, The Solo Timpanist. This is Etude number one of my favorite etudes. There are a lot of things to consider, but one of the very first things to consider is your mallet selection. We want to make sure that you choose a mallet that's going to be able to give you a good forte tone out of the drums, but something that's also going to be able to give you the articulation that you need to play some of these faster passages. We need that articulation. And so, it's going to be a good balance of, well, how do I want to produce a good tone on my quarter notes that happen at the very entrance of the piece? And so, anyway, after having gone through a slew of mallets, the ones that I came up with are the Innovative Percussion BT6s, and these are bamboo. I like the feel of bamboo. I like the way it feels coming off of the drums, kind of how light you can move the mallets pretty quickly because the bamboo is pretty light as well. So I thought that the BT6s are a great mallet. It also gives you a little bit more length than some of the other conventional mallets. So when you're going for some of these faster passages where you have to play crossovers, that's important. So sometimes you'll see when you watch me perform the Etude, I kind of move my hand back a little bit, but we'll talk about that later. So these are the mallets that I chose. I think that these are a great choice on any timpani, on any heads that you're playing on. These happen to be Remo Renaissance heads. You may be playing on smooth white heads at your school. It doesn't really matter. These mallets are going to be good for any timpani, pretty much any head as well. So let's talk first about tone production. I think that's super important on timpani. Timpani is a little bit different when it comes to tone production because the heads are very large and we can't distort the head by playing into the drum. So the thing that you have to try to produce is a good legato stroke. The way I like to explain it to my students is I really like to feel the mallet pop off of the head kind of on its own. If you can kind of do a little bit of an experiment where you just kind of drop the mallet and then you're going to kind of catch the mallet as well. So that should be at your most relaxed stroke. Okay? When I think of a good timpani stroke, I think of a good legato stroke. I think of the mallet just coming off of the head kind of on its own. And there's going to be some different approaches on some of the different passages of this etude. And we're going to go into those a little bit. But the very beginning is important because you're playing quarter note lengths. You want each one of those notes to touch the next note. And we're going to talk about dampening in a second, and that's going to kind of, we're going to talk about how these quarter notes touch one another. But your forte sound at the very beginning is very important. So you want to try to develop a good forte sound and try to understand where the threshold is for playing a forte sound. So what I like to do is kind of like what we talked about with snare drum earlier, which is you want to try to find where your forte is. As long as you're producing a relaxed stroke, you're going to get a good forte sound. You're going to get a good tone out of the drum, which is exactly what it is that we want from this etude and from just in general from timpani playing. I think that sets aside students quite a bit. When you hear a mature tone, you can tell that a student really understands what a good tone sounds like and how to produce that. And I think a good starting point is to just think about playing relaxed strokes. So as we go on, you'll see that when I play, I prefer to play Fretch grip. Many people, I think many students play a kind of what we call an American grip, which is a little more turned over this way, not quite turned over all the way, but somewhere in between. And I think that's perfectly fine. I think as long as you're still trying to create a full, rich tone, it really doesn't matter too much which grit you choose to use. So with that in mind, even if you're playing with an American grit, it's still about how the mallet comes off of the head. It's kind of a personal preference of mine to also sit while I play. I don't always sit while I play, but I think for the most part, I do, and that just gets my hands a little closer to the drums. If I'm standing, then my arms have to be a little lower. That's a matter of personal preference. As we move on, you see that right away we have some 16th notes. The stickings that are written in this etude that were given to us by the late great Vic Firth. Some of them are great stickings. I would suggest that you follow the stickings that he gave you and then figure out if that's the sticking that's going to work best for you. That's what's going to help you play comfortably around the drums. So one of the very first stickings that I see is that he gives us a right hand lead going down the drums. Okay? And so when you play right hand lead going down the drums, it makes you have to push to the next drum. I chose to use a different sticking for that. I chose to use a left hand lead going down the drums. Okay, again, that's a matter of personal preference, but again, you have to kind of make that choice for yourself and feel what is going to be the most comfortable for you playing around the drums. Same thing happens when we get to these 16 notes that involve a crossover. So we're playing these 16 notes, and you have to cross over this way. Now, you can play that left hand lead if you wanted to. So I encourage you to play some different stickings, see what's going to work for you, what's going to be able to have you play those passages in the most comfortable way that you can. So now I want to talk about rules briefly. We don't have very many rules, but we do have one that's very important that takes us from one section to the next section. And that roll begins on the 32-inch drum on this G, and it's a decrescendo roll, and then we crescendo out of the roll. When we start the decrescendo, you should be playing a little faster roll speed because you're starting at a forte dynamic. But as you decrescendo, I encourage you to slow your roll speed down because we're trying to let the head vibrate. If we play too fast of a roll, especially on this lowest drum, at a lower dynamic, we're essentially going to be stopping the head from vibrating, right? So as you decrescendo, slow your roll down. And then as you crescendo, you speed your roll back up. Takes us into the next section. Your roll, when you perform the roll, be sure that you don't constrict your hands. Don't tighten up. Stay loose, especially when you start playing a slower roll. And then as you play faster, try to incorporate your wrist motion and try to incorporate a little bit of finger, and that's going to help you be able to increase the speed of that roll. Now, I know we talked about stickings earlier, but I do want to mention that when we get into this kind of second section of the piece, we have triplets, some fast-moving triplets that go. You want to be careful that you're playing still in the best beating spots, as best you can handle. So. We want to make sure that as we move from drum to drum, because it's a fast passage, that we don't get in a beating spot like this, where now all of a sudden you're in two different distances from the edge. We want to make sure that we keep good beating spots as we play, good playing zones on the drums. And it's a very challenging thing when the notes are moving so quickly. Going on to the next section, this is the part where we flip and we use the butt end of the mallet with our right hand, and this kind of like cascara type of pattern, while the left hand is playing between drums. The thing that you have to be very conscious of is that it's supposed to be mezzo forte. I set it at a mezzo forte dynamic. You want to be careful that with the butt end of the stick, that this has to be a little bit under the left hand, only because this is so articulate. So if you play this at the same dynamic, your right hand sound, because of the articulation, is going to kind of overpower this left hand sound. What I like to think of is playing the right hand just a little bit under that dynamic. Okay? And then the other thing you have to be careful of as you play the faster notes, try not to crescendo those notes. And that's a very difficult thing to do, but the more you play, you can kind of try to find how light your right hand will play and try to employ some finger motion to help you. Same thing when you get to the triplet. Okay. Try to keep those nice and light in the right hand. Now the left hand is super important too, because we don't want that to turn into control strokes. We want to try to keep those still legato strokes. Just between the two drums. Same thing when you get to the triplet section. Now let's talk a little bit about some of these faster moving notes where we need to play with some articulation, and they're fast moving notes. So when we get back to the regular felt side rather of the mallets, and we're back to forte, we need to make sure that we can hear some of these 30 seconds when we go. I mean, that's a fast moving section. To get the articulation, we do have to hold on a little bit more. And so I think about holding on to the mallet just a little bit more so that we get just a little bit more articulation. So let's talk a little bit about the articulation as you play through some of these faster passages, these 30-second notes. I like to think of kind of holding on to the mallet just a little bit. We get to those faster moving notes. Try to hold on to the mallet just a little bit. If you play that with a little bit more articulation, I think those notes will speak a little more clearly for you. The next section I want to talk about is here toward the end, as we move through triplet, 16th note, quintuplet, sextuplet. It's very important that you try to keep those strokes smooth and try to do your best to not accent any of those. He didn't write accents. It's not calling for accents, so what we want to try to avoid is playing. We want to try to keep those as smooth as possible. As you move through that metric modulation. Now, the very end, again, we talked about some articulation. We're going to try to approach this the same way at the very end when we have those fast 30-second notes. We want articulation. A couple of things that you can do is, of course, we talked about holding onto the mallet a little bit. I think that's appropriate. The other thing we can do, especially because we're playing that on the 32-inch drum, is move in slightly from your regular beating spot. That's also going to help give you a little bit more articulation. So hopefully you can hear the difference between, a regular beating spot and just moving in slightly. And I think that might help you also get those 30-second note articulations out. So I hope that my suggestions and my tips will help you in your journey through this etude. It's a difficult etude, but it's very fun. I think it's a very musical etude when it comes to playing timpani. I think it really will display your sound, your tone. More than anything, it's just a fun etude to work through. So good luck this year, and I wish you the best.